everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
All right, strap in because today we're diving deep into the 2024 election.
We're talking about a forum where Donald Trump took questions from Latino voters.
Exactly. And we've got this piece. It's from the Epoch Times. It's called Latinos Ask, Donald Trump Answers. It's all about this event that Univision News put together.
It's pure gold, this kind of stuff. You get to hear straight from voters what they're thinking, what they're worried about, what matters to them this election.
Absolutely. And let me tell you, some of these questions they put to Trump, they did not hold back.
That's what's so great about it. You get past the speeches, the sound bites. You see how these candidates handle things, on the spot.
Exactly. So let's jump right in. The article, it really highlights how the economy, how that was a big concern for the voters there, and it digs into how he dealt with that.
Yeah, right off the bat, a farmer, Jorge Velasquez, he asked about immigration, specifically how it affects farm work, with undocumented workers. He asked Trump, straight up, who's going to do the work if those folks get deported?
Wow. Talk about starting with a tough one. I mean, that really puts Trump's whole stance on immigration right out there in the open. What'd he say?
So Trump, he really leaned into legal immigration, said that's the solution, said his administration, they put a system in place for that. He said, we want many people to come to our country, but we want them to come legally through a system. And then he went on to say that his policies, they actually helped farmers, said what's happening now is actually hurting them.
So he's drawing a line in the sand there. His vision for immigration versus what's going on now, and he's tying it directly to how well these voters are doing, at least economically.
Exactly. He even took it a step further, saying that because of illegal immigration, criminals are getting in, murderers, drug traffickers, and that this directly hurts Latinos who are here legally working, living their lives.
And he threw out some numbers, right? Didn't the article mention some statistics he used?
He did. He cited a report, this ICE report, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and they said there are over 425,000 illegal immigrants. They've got criminal convictions just roaming around the U.S. And get this, over 13,000 of them were convicted of homicide.
Man, those are some heavy stats. But how do you connect that back to what those voters in the room were worried about? Their jobs, the economy.
He's making the case that his way, focusing on legal immigration, border security, that it protects American jobs, he's framing it as a way to look out for Latino workers, make sure they're not being pushed aside, basically saying, I'm the guy who gets you, and I've got a plan to fix it.
It's interesting, isn't it, how he's bringing all these threads together, the economy, immigration, even this idea of criminals. He's building a narrative. And, it probably really lands with certain voters.
No doubt. It's a story we hear a lot in politics, especially with immigration, this whole us versus them thing, this need to protect what we see as ours.
Speaking of narratives, this forum, it touched on another controversial one. We're talking about Haitian migrants. And you mentioned how direct those questions were. Well, this is where it gets even more interesting.
It does, the Epoch Times piece. It brings up this voter, Jose Saralegre, he's Mexican-American, and he brings up this rumor about Haitian migrants saying they were eating people's pets.
Now, this is where things get a little out there, because that rumor, it was debunked. The article even mentions that authorities in Ohio, in Springfield, where this whole thing started, they said it wasn't true. So what happened? Did this Saralegre guy, did he say anything?
He did. He called it out. He said straight up that it had been debunked and asked Trump point blank, did he believe it? And this is what makes these forums so interesting. You get voters putting these claims right to the candidate, and we get to hear how they respond.
So what did Trump say? Did he buy it?
Well, he said he was just repeating what he saw, in the media, said there were reports about Haitians eating pets, and he even added other things too. But then he shifted gears, started talking about how this influx of migrants, how it was putting a strain on Springfield, Ohio, specifically.
So he kind of dodged actually saying whether he believed the rumor or not, but he used it as a way to talk about immigration more broadly.
Exactly. He painted this picture of a town totally overwhelmed, people suddenly everywhere, folks who lived there couldn't get into hospital, schools, even rent was impossible. He was saying they were being pushed out.
It's just, I don't know, it's like he's mixing these two things, this debunked rumor, with the very real problems that come with a lot of new people coming into a community all at once. He's appealing to both, to people's emotions and to their logic.
It's powerful stuff. By blending those things together, he's tapping into those anxieties people already have, about culture changing too fast, about not enough to go around, about feeling like things are out of control.
And for some voters, those who are already leaning towards believing this stuff, whether it's true or not, it probably hits even harder.
You got it. It creates this sense of urgency, of fear. Things are changing too fast, and he's the only one who can stop it.
Sounds like a deliberate strategy to me.
Yeah.
A way to get a certain group of voters on his side.
I'd say so. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out as the election heats up. Speaking of which, the article also mentions the forum touched on other topics, some pretty big ones: gun control, climate change, even transgender athletes.
Oh, now that's a mix. Anything stand out?
Well, even though the article really zeroes in on the economy, immigration, and those more, let's say, heated exchanges we just talked about, it does mention something else interesting. It seems a good number of those voters were worried about the national debt.
That's a hot topic right now, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. How did Trump address that one?
So, if the article's got it right, he pointed the finger at the current administration, called it reckless spending, and he claimed that his policies, if they were back in place, would get the debt under control.
So, same playbook as before, drawing that line between his approach to the economy and what we've got going on now. It's a message he's used before, but clearly, at least for some of those voters at the forum, it's resonating.
And that's a good reminder, right? This forum, it's a snapshot. It gives us a peek into what's on the minds of some Latino voters, but it's just one piece of a much bigger picture.
Right, you can't just look at one event like this and think you understand this election. There's so much more to it.
Exactly. I mean, even within the Latino community, there are so many different viewpoints. And then you've got the history of these issues, how the media shapes what people think. It's complicated.
It's like you said, it's about connecting the dots, taking these individual stories and figuring out how they fit into the bigger picture. And that's what we do here on the Deep Dive, isn't it?
It is. It's about taking a step back, looking at the information, and trying to understand why things are happening the way they are.
And maybe even more important, it's about giving our listeners the tools to do that themselves.
Absolutely. Because knowing what's going on, being able to cut through all the noise and the spin, that's crucial, especially now when it seems like misinformation and division are everywhere you look.
Well said. So as we wrap up this look at the forum, what it tells us about this election, what's the most important thing our listeners should take away?
So get this. The week before this whole Trump forum thing, one of the voters who was there, Teresa Jedrow, she asked Kamala Harris, the vice president, to name 3 good things about Trump, 3 virtues.
Oh, I like it. A little political payback. So they asked Trump the same thing. That's got to be tough. It's one thing to criticize your opponent, but to actually say something nice about them, that's different.
Right. And the article, it even says Trump called it out, said it was the hardest question of the night.
I bet. So did he actually answer? Come up with 3 things.
He did, eventually. He started off by saying, look, he's not a fan of her politics, but, and this is a but, he admitted she seems to have a knack for hanging in there. He even pointed out how she was pretty much out of the running for president before she got the VP spot, said it shows she's tough.
So he's saying she's a fighter, she doesn't give up easily.
Exactly. And then he said she seems to have long-time friendships, which he said wasn't really a skill, but a good thing. And then last one, he said she carries herself well.
Carries herself well. What's that even mean? Seems a little vague.
It does, right? But the article, it says he went on a bit more, said, I like some of the things she says, some of her, how she carries herself in a certain way. Maybe he's talking about charisma, how she comes across when she's speaking, but he doesn't really come out and say it.
You know, it's funny how these moments, these little unscripted things, they can be so calculated. What do you make of that, his answer?
I think you nailed it. Calculated is the word. He's trying to find that balance, going after his opponent without seeming too aggressive. By throwing out these kind of backhanded compliments, he can look like the bigger person without actually saying anything nice.
Classic politician move. But it's still interesting. What he picked, resilience, loyalty, and, I guess, presence, whatever that means, makes you wonder, are those the things he looks for in a leader? Or is he picking them because he thinks that's what certain voters want to hear?
Totally. And it just shows you how complicated this stuff is. Every word, every pause, it can mean different things to different people.
And speaking of complicated, the forum, it didn't just stop there. The article mentions they talked about other big issues too: gun control, climate change, even transgender athletes. Anything there catch your eye?
Even though the article, it really focuses on the economy, immigration, and those more, shall we say, spirited exchanges, it does bring up one other interesting tidbit. Seems like a good chunk of those voters, they were worried about the national debt.
Yeah, that's a big one these days. Everyone's talking about it. So how'd Trump handle that one?
Well, according to the article, he put the blame squarely on the current administration, called their spending reckless, and said that if his policies were back in action, the debt would be under control.
So, same strategies before, my way's better than their way. It's a tale as old as time, but hey, seems like it worked on at least some of those voters at the forum.
Which is why it's so important to remember, right? This forum, it's just one little window into what some Latino voters are thinking, but it's not the whole picture, not even close.
You're right. You can't take one event, even one like this, and think you've got this election all figured out. There are so many moving parts.
Exactly. I mean, even within the Latino community, there are so many different viewpoints. And then you've got the history of these issues, how the media shapes what people think. It's complicated.
It's like you said before, it's about connecting the dots, taking these individual stories and figuring out how they fit into the bigger picture. And that's what we do here on the Deep Dive, isn't it?
It is. It's about taking a step back, looking at the information, and trying to understand why things are happening the way they are.
And maybe even more important, it's about giving our listeners the tools to do that themselves.
Absolutely, because knowing what's going on, being able to cut through all the noise and the spin, that's crucial, especially now when it seems like misinformation and division are everywhere you look.
Well said. So as we wrap up this look at the forum, what it tells us about this election, what's the most important thing our listeners should take away?
You know, it really hits you seeing it even in that small group, how Latino voters, they aren't all the same. Different things they're worried about, different things they want. You can't just lump them all together.
So easy to do that, though, right?
Yeah.
Especially during an election, everyone wants to put people in boxes.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to really listen, to hear what individual people are saying, what their lives are like. Candidates, they can't just make these big sweeping statements assuming they know what Latino voters want.
They've got to actually get it, the nuance, the fact that different people have different priorities.
Right. 100%. It's about showing you understand the issues, how they actually affect people's lives, the people you're trying to reach.
It's about trust at the end of the day, and that's not something you can just fake. You got to earn it.
Exactly. And this forum, it was like a tiny glimpse into that. The back and forth, trying to connect, the doubts, the hope, it's all there.
Like we were watching a tiny version of this huge political battle that's going on all over the country.
Exactly. And it just shows you how important it is to stay informed, to think critically about what you're seeing and hearing, and then to make your own voice heard.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This has been a fascinating look at this forum, what it tells us about this election. Listener, it's your turn. What were your big takeaways from this? Anything surprise you? What questions are you left with?
Head over to social media platform. Let us know what you think. Let's keep this conversation going.
Because your voice matters. And understanding all these different perspectives, that's how we figure this out together. Until next time, happy diving.